You'll notice that I've included some extra files intermingled with my subject slides, just as examples. Some may not relate to this lecture, but I find them interesting all the same, and these are all from the Australian National Archives UFO records. The image you see up on screen at the moment is only part of one page that I typed up of hundreds of file summaries we've done. So every file and every page we've looked at, that's what we did with it, and we put it on our webpage on the net. So everything that we've looked at, you can go and look at. You can see by that what page number it was on, page 17. You can go and look at page 17 on file 58011 part 4 and look at all the documents yourself. Why do we do it this way? Rather than have other researchers laboriously go through every one of the thousands of pages at the archives looking for something in particular, we wrote brief notes on the content of every page in every file. Anyone can go to these file summaries and scan them to find what they're looking for. It's like an index. Keeping in mind, of course, that the National Australian Archives were obtained under the 30-year rule. That's why they've been so nice to us. Which makes 1973, at the moment, the most current record we're able to access. But I will tell you that when January the 1st clicked over this year, instead of 20 files coming up under the search term, 34 files came up, so they released another 14. However, files released under the Freedom of Information Act can be a lot more recent, so don't think we're only limited to files prior to 1974, we're not. We've also conducted register searches at our local National Archives office in Adelaide, something we will endeavour to carry out at various other archive offices around the country, which we're actually doing right now as I speak. So all the files you see as digital copies online can be viewed on your personal computers in the luxury of your own home. These records are currently held at the head office of the National Archives in Canberra. And contrary to conjecture from some who are very quick to imply that we won't find anything new in our recent government file search, we have uncovered hundreds of pages of documents that have never seen the light of day. So statements of this nature are completely without substance. So what do we know that we didn't know a year ago? We know plenty. We know that Australia, especially the RAAF and the Long Range Weapons Research Establishment at Woomera, were deeply involved with other governments and various intelligence organisations, including NASA, in joint space programs and the sharing of information relating to anything space-based. So my first file will have something to do with the international cooperation and interest in this subject. What was Project Moondust? In 1953, the USAF 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron was created. Its purpose at that time was to recover downed enemy aircraft during the Korean War. In 1957, it was expanded to recover objects and debris from space vehicles, because we had satellites in orbit then. And in 1961, according to a United States Air Force memo, which I read, it included UFOs. While researching the topic of Project Moondust on the internet, I came across a 42-page file released under the USA Freedom of Information Act, which clearly demonstrates a link between UFOs, the United Nations, and Project Moondust. I should mention here that copyright for these documents on this site, and the ones I have up on screen, belong to Dr. Bob Wood and Ryan S. Wood of the United States. On the first page of these documents, the subject header simply reads Project Moondust and dates from November 73. It concerns the recovery of what may have been Soviet satellite debris. However, also included in this 42-page package are documents on a 1978 discussion concerning the potential of having the United Nations, which is a very large international body, undertake UFO investigations, report on UFO sightings, and retrieve crashed objects from several different countries. It also mentions the recovery of a spherical object said to have landed smoothly in Buenos Aires in 1984. So Moondust was very much a global project. But a singular statement recounted by the American delegate to the United Nations made by the Prime Minister of Grenada leaps out at you on page 9 of this 42-page document and reads as follows. The recent report of the abduction of a Cessna aircraft in Australia seemed to him to be a compelling reason for the United States to come alive to its responsibilities and take a serious look at the UFO phenomenon, to which planet Earth has been conspicuously exposed since 1947. There's that date again. Two words immediately caught my attention in this phrase. The word abduction, which was used to describe the disappearance of Freddie Valentich, not crashed or lost or missing at sea, but abducted. And of course a reference to 1947, which we all come across during the course of our research. It seems to be a defining timeline in ufology. We have pre-1947 and post-1947 as a way to categorise the modern era of sightings. If you look at the last line of the report on the slide, you will clearly see the word abduction, right on the very bottom line, as you can see. Abduction of a Cessna aircraft. On the next page of this 42-page document, it states that 133 countries, and that's a lot of countries, had already provided reports regarding UFOs for the express purpose of setting up a United Nations-sponsored committee to study the phenomenon. Jacques Vallée, Stanton Friedman and J. Allen Hynek were also present at this meeting. However, the official reason for Project Moondust was to retrieve downed space vehicles, and what we wanted to know was whether or not Australia participated in this project. We're certain the answer is yes, we did. The Department of Supply file SA 5644/2/1 indicates a 1962 memo from the controller of WRE to the superintendent at Woomera. In it, it states that the United States Embassy sought the WRE's assistance to obtain information about sightings or of downed fragments of space vehicles. The location and recovery of fragments was exactly the role of the US Air Force Project Moondust, and the request to Australia was made the year after the project commenced in full force to include UFOs. In our reading of the Department of Supply file, there is never actually a mention of the words Project Moondust. However, as it was a classified US project at that time, that's not surprising. Under this banner, the Australian government located and retrieved several items of interest, which we've listed on our website and up on the screen. It also means that the military had in place a quick response unit. In his 1996 document, UFOs sub Rosa Down Under, the Australian military and government role in UFO controversy, Bill Chalker wrote, "It appears the Joint Intelligence Organisation have a rapid intervention capability, as they have been able to instigate prompt, widespread ground searches in suspected hardware crashes. They do this through special access channels. This operation may be similar to the US activity operating under the codename Project Moondust." So I think it's fair to say that Australia did participate in Project Moondust, did have and still has a rapid intervention team connected to the Defence Department. And you'll see a picture of the guys in later slides. The reason I'm confident that the rapid intervention team exists is partly due to a number of conversations a member of our team has had with a resident of Woomera who is retired from the military and still lives there. He claims to have been a member of this retrieval team, and at the moment we are trying to corroborate this story. From the retrievals listed on the screen, I found one in particular rather interesting. It was the one retrieved near Inkerman, Queensland in 1968 and handed over to the US Embassy. It kind of makes you wonder what was in those diplomatic pouches, because they're not searched. The next find I'd like to discuss is based on a couple of files from the South Australian Department of Supply at Woomera on sightings that occurred between 1952 and 1954, and there is reason for quoting 1952 and 54. You might think that's old, but when you find out why I chose them, then you'll probably be very amazed. So there were literally hundreds of sightings over the years in this highly restricted facility. The fact that the base servicemen even had their own UFO club called STARS, which was permitted, but with very stringent conditions, including their inability to publish any of their UFO reports. In order for you to understand the significance of the Woomera Space Facility, the dates I have chosen, and its participation in projects on a global scale, I'm going to provide you with a few facts and figures. In April 1947, the long-range weapons establishment formed between the UK and Australia. In March 1949, we had the first missile launch from Woomera. In 1957, the first Skylark rocket went up, and in 1958, the first Black Knight rocket was launched. In 1959, which was a very significant time, the first deep space tracking station to be established outside the United States is established at Woomera by NASA. In 1962, countries from Europe and Australia formed the European Launcher Development Organisation, or ELDO. This collaboration launched the Europa rockets. So in 1964, the first Europa rocket launch was sent up. Excuse me, I'm going to drink water. Then in May 66, the first Europa rocket with dummy stages was launched. In November 1967, Australia launched its very own satellite, the Weapons Research Establishment Satellite, or RESAT, making Australia only the fourth country in the world to launch its own satellite from its own territory. The list of launches and research and development programs goes on, but we'll leave that for now. The Department of Defence lists WUMA's possible activities as follows: air-to-air combat training, bombing camps, research into nanotechnology, remote area operations, airborne and ground testing of long-range weapon systems, rocket testing including scramjet technology, space vehicle launch and recovery including reusable rockets, parachute drops, hot and dry equipment trials, and because electromagnetic interference is extremely low in this area, it permits EMI and EMC testing. Electromagnetic interference and compatibility between guidance systems and aircraft electronics, both on the ground and in the air. Up until the present day, WUMA still operates a deep space tracking station. They have what they call ears in space, listening to noises coming from deep space. Monitors equipment on satellites in orbit, have research and development contracts with NASA, the European Space Agency, Kistler Aerospace, British Aerospace, and the Japanese Kangaroo project, and numerous other projects, for whatever reasons, are not so public. But because I work in building technology, one of my clients is WUMA Rocket Range, also Pine Gap, and the DSTO at Salisbury. Like breaking the Mach 7 barrier before it was announced, they did that at WUMA 2 years ago. The Americans announced they'd done it this year in March, I think it was March. WUMA is the size of England and covers 127,000 square kilometres, so you can hide a lot of activity in a remote desert compound the size of a small country. But in the early 50s, WUMA was a lot bigger. It covered some 270,000 square kilometres. It was also the subject of some very interesting cases. On the night of Saturday, the 27th of October 1952 at 8 o'clock, 5 persons witnessed a cigar-shaped object fly on a straight and horizontal trajectory 40 degrees above the horizon from the witnesses' right-hand side to their left. 4 of the witnesses were at the WUMA open-air theatre, and they were all seated together. They were Warrant Officer Hanley, Warrant Officer Walker, Joe Ager, who just happened to be the Chief Baker at the Department of Supply, and Sergeant Phillips. In his report, Sergeant Phillips makes several observations, and considering he was an officer at WUMA, he would have observed test flights, been familiar with rockets and jets. He saw the cigar-shaped object had 2 portholes and interior lighting. Now, what would an unmanned rocket be doing with portholes and interior lighting, for that matter? It travelled faster than any jet aircraft he'd ever seen. And in his statement, he said he was not prepared to say whether this thing was an earthly object. Walker states it was not a falling star. It was faster than any aircraft he'd seen, and Hanley commented that he heard no noise, that it was definitely something other than anything from the heavens, by that meaning a comet or a shooting star. The other witness was the wife of a serviceman and gave the same description. The interesting part is where the Chief Security Officer forwards all the reports to the State Security Office in Adelaide from the investigator entitled "Flying Saucer Observed over WUMA." In a brief covering letter, he states the witnesses are all reliable and sober, and that the cigar-shaped object was observed whether man-made or not. A copy is then forwarded to the Deputy Chief Security Officer in Melbourne, so a paper trail begins. So that's what we find, all these reports, the letters to and from. It then transpires that the Advertiser newspaper also published reports on this very same object, cited by different witnesses in different parts of the state on the same night. All news clippings in any paper in Australia are cut out by the Defence Department and kept in files, and we found a lot of them. And so a new file is born. RSO 52/618 becomes part of a greater file. Now, the next slide is going to be very difficult for you to see because this was one of the ones we weren't supposed to get. It was a top secret tracking log, so for various reasons it's a very bad reproduction, but I hope you can get the idea. The tracking of this object to the far right-hand side is just a hairline, so if you can just look at that. I wanted to get an idea of the importance of this because there are numerous contradictions in the reporting of this particular event. The tracking line is on the far right, as I said. The story behind this sighting is as follows, by a radar officer on duty at the time. At 1:45, while searching for a Mustang on G1, a target was locked onto in the Shell Lagoon area. On looking through the telescope on the radar dish, no target could be seen. The signal-to-noise ratio was at least 5:1, which is similar to that obtained from a large aircraft. Between 1:45 and 2 p.m, the target came to within a mile and still could not be seen. At 2:05, I decided to plot the course of the target. So where the target area at the top is a big circle and the tracking line commences just under the Shell Lagoon sign, it's because he decided to track it after it had been seen. At times during the movement of the target, smaller targets seemed to detach themselves from the main target and drift away. The official explanation, by the way, turned out to be a snow cloud. However, they shot themselves in the foot on that one. The report is titled Flying Saucer Phenomena over Range G1, Not Anomalous Snow Cloud. The summary for the weather conditions appearing in this file are as follows, and I did check them out independently. I went back through the records. It was a fine day. There was high cloud at 25,000 feet. Warm temperature, it was 84 degrees or 27 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was hot. It was a strong northerly wind at 25 to 30 miles an hour, which blew from an inland desert, because Woomera is smack bang in the middle of the desert. This is where it gets strange. On the report it says, conclusion. In view of the foregoing weather report, really hot, and the absence of any visual sightings, so they didn't see anything, it probably came from a cloud. In a report put together 2 weeks later, after questioning other radar operators, they refer to the object as the invisible phenomenon. And because no object was visible, there was nothing of security interest, although it was flying over Woomera, which was a very, very highly restricted area. So if you can see it, it can't be all bad. If you can't see it, it can't be all bad. In the very same report, one paragraph above this one, I quote, the fact that small portions were breaking away tend to show that whatever it was on radar was registering the target very efficiently on something other than ordinary snow. So on one hand it's a snow cloud and the next line it's not. So there goes our snow theory. Another radar operator suggested it could have been a neutron cloud, but it was travelling from above the major explosive target area towards the target area. Now, the major explosions occurred in Woomera are off-screen at the very bottom of this fine hairline. Out of screen is where the major detonations occurred. But it travelled from the major explosive area towards the target area, and we don't even know if any explosives have been detonated because this was never checked out by the military. But if there was an explosion, then it preceded itself to the detonation point for these types of explosions. In the second paragraph on the same piece of paper it reads, the phenomenon was locked onto his radar beam for a period of 24 minutes, which in no way can be compared with flying saucer phenomenon of previous reports. So I take it from that comment that they knew pretty much how a flying saucer behaved. Here's why I don't think our invisible snow cloud theory works. The resident meteorological officer stated it was fine. There was a cloud at 25,000 feet which was visible. Our snow cloud was shuffling along at 1,500 feet, up to around 5,000 feet. It was very low to the ground. It should have been highly visible from the ground and through a telescope, which they viewed. It was 84 degrees that day. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the middle of October. There was a strong northerly wind blowing from the interior, and the probability of a snow cloud at this time of day is mind-boggling. Smaller objects detached themselves from the target and moved away. The cloud therefore methodically sent out scouts looking for somewhere to snow. Shell Lagoon is a salt lake in the middle of the desert, well inland, and has a rainfall of 16 mil, compared to Adelaide, 40 mil. South Australia has the dubious title of being the driest state on the driest continent on Earth. The average wind speed in October is 10 miles an hour, the temperature around 80 degrees. The object was doing 37 miles an hour, so it was actually going 7 miles an hour faster than the wind was blowing that day at its maximum. In 3 minutes, it dropped 1,600 feet. In the next 4 minutes, it rose 2,200 feet. It did 2 right-hand turns, one was a 90 degree. It never went above 5,600 feet, and the visible cloud was still at 25,000 feet. I did a check of snow-bearing clouds on the internet. I thought that would be a good idea. Most are fluffy and white and highly visible. A few were dense and wispy, but still highly visible. This cloud was totally invisible, and in the 42 years of recorded weather at Woomera, there was not one reference to fog. You'll see from the slide now on screen that some UFOs were filmed during a Skylark rocket test back in 1967, and we're yet to locate that film. Now for a very interesting case. In May 1954, a dark grey circular disc was observed by a radar operator through binoculars pacing a Canberra bomber directly above it. The cruising speed of the Canberra bomber is around 400 miles an hour. The disc flew up to the Canberra bomber, paused over the top of it, remained stationary above it, then flew away at great speed, and you'll understand the significance of great speed. Radar operators who took the bearing on the target timed it between 2 points and realised that this object was doing in excess of 3,600 miles an hour, and yet it was seemingly stationary seconds beforehand. The radar operator who witnessed the event said, and I quote, "During this time I found it very hard to believe what I was seeing, so I shut my eyes and looked again, and it was still stationary over the Canberra bomber. What makes this guy so believable is he worked for Vickers Armstrong. They made aircraft and he knew what he was looking at." Incidentally, Mach 1 was reached in October 1947, there's that date again, by Chuck Yeager of The Right Stuff, if anyone's seen that film, in a Bell X-1 aircraft. Mach 2 was reached in December 53. This guy was going Mach 5. Mach 3 was reached in 1956. It took a further 5 years to achieve Mach 4, so 4 times the speed of sound, and shortly after that, Mach 5 was achieved in 1961. It achieved 3,603 miles an hour, 7 years after something else did it at Woomera. It then took us 43 years to go from Mach 6 to Mach 7 in March this year. Although according to my sources, of course, we achieved Mach 7 2 years ago by a security officer that I have interviewed who is at Woomera working on scramjet technology. But the most interesting thing about this case, and you really need to get your head around this, is that the object went from 400 miles an hour to 3,600 miles an hour in 10 seconds in 1954. So I don't think it was ours. And finally from Woomera, the dancing light, an object sighted adjacent to Launcher Apron 1 on the 21st of October 1954. This graphic is a copy from the original file, and that only represents 8 degrees of arc on this particular graph. By all accounts, this was a very erratic moving light. It so interested the superintendent of the base that he forwarded a report to the head of the Missiles Project Group, who happened to be an American, and to Professor Huxley, head of the physics school at Adelaide University. The light alternated from deep orange to deep yellow. It was egg-shaped like an egg on its side, and it was approximately only 500 feet above the observers. It was 3 times larger than Venus, is how they described it at its largest. Venus, incidentally, was mapped and its position noted, although as you'll see from its behaviour, it could hardly have been a planet. Clouds were at 15,000 feet and the wind north-northeast at 10 miles an hour. The light was first observed, as you see, at point A. It then moved in an anti-clockwise direction around the jagged ellipse to point B. It did this 3 or 4 times, so this thing actually moved in circles, as Venus does. This was repeated 3 or 4 times, once again, and very slowly then descended to point C. So it paused, it stopped and started and took off again. Then it moved in a period of 2 seconds through point D and E, and then disappeared. So now we know why they sent the report to a physics expert and discounted the planet Venus. Milne Bay. These were hot spots I found. I had 4 or 5 files which represented some 4,000 pages to summarise. Milne Bay was one of the most prolific sighting areas I came across. One of the most intriguing things I found throughout my disclosure journey refers to a series of reports coming out of Papua New Guinea, in particular the Milne Bay area. Considering the number of files I scanned, this area was by far the most active, next to Woomera. As you can see from the map on screen, Milne Bay is on the easternmost tip of Papua New Guinea. It's bordered by the Solomon Sea above and the Coral Sea below. The surrounding islands and seas were rife with reports of all kinds of weird and wonderful sightings. And what I'm going to do is give you a very brief roll call of some of those sightings over a 1-year period in 1965, just 1 year, and these are only a few of them. There may well be an underwater base in this area because of the number of sightings over such a great period of time, and also because the survey map on screen indicates that the ocean is very deep in this area, and the seabeds around these islands are littered with underwater caverns. I'm also referring to sightings from the 50s, including Father Gill's well-documented case, right up until the present day, just a couple of years ago, when I received a letter from a businessman on the Solomon Islands who owns a timber mill and has claimed to have seen several UFOs coming out of the sea in the Solomon Islands. The Santa Cruz Islands, if you'll note, where it says HMAS Anzac to the far right of the screen, and they're the subject of my next report. HMAS Anzac reported that at 5:45 Thursday, May 5th, 1966, when in position near the Santa Cruz Islands, 4 unidentified objects were sighted at 20 degrees above the horizon by the navigating officer and several other officers who were not on the bridge at the time. These objects were quite distinct and appeared closely grouped, with the leading object glowing red and the 3 trailing objects green in colour, forming an equilateral triangle, the apex toward the leading object. They left trails of colour in their wake, but these did not last. The trails were approximately 6 times the length of the object. After the objects had disappeared behind cloud ahead of the ship, they reappeared one more time before disappearing once again into cloud cover. No smoke or other evidence was seen during the passage of these objects. The approximate time in sight was not more than 25 seconds, and the objects were travelling at a very high rate of speed. No radar contacts were detected, although they tried to get the thing on radar. Although there is a handwritten notation on this report to recheck all radar imaging for that day. There were 2 forwarding reports and another note clearly stating, this report should not find its way to the Australian UFO file, and was signed by the Director of Naval Intelligence. Slide 35, Milne Bay. So here's our brief roll call on the Milne Bay sightings. A strange vertical light is seen for several nights coming out of the water. It was so compelling that the Australian government sent HMAS Bass to investigate and try and photograph this vertical light. A group of school children and their teacher see an extremely bright light changing from red to blue and swaying from side to side, but the fact that it was swaying from side to side a mile each way was significant. A bright light was seen at the sea and a bright light at sea responds to a torch flashed in its direction, but that could have easily been a fishing boat or something like that. There was a flash of blue light over Carrigaria Bay, a strange yellow-green light wavering back and forth, but the light from the yellow-green light gave off enough light sufficient to light up the entire beach. Then a red glare from a cylindrical object was seen over De Boyne Lagoon in Papua New Guinea with multiple witnesses. It had a noise like a diesel engine. The object cruised back and forth. This object was also seen from a neighbouring area over 3 consecutive nights. And the amount of paperwork that went backwards and forwards of reports from the witnesses was mind-boggling. An object passed over Sewa Tai Tai, emitting a bright beam of red light towards the earth. This sighting was witnessed by approximately 100 road workers camped in the area, and there are several reports and files on this one particular incident. And from the government aerodrome in Kavieng, right up the top of the slide previously from Milne Bay, there was a report sent to DAFI, the Department of Air Force Intelligence. An incident at Kavieng Harbour where a brilliant white light was seen by several witnesses for approximately 11 minutes and then sped off at fantastic speed. An object sighted 1 mile offshore in the district of Samurai. There were hundreds of sightings from the district of Samurai, casting a dull yellow vertical beam of light. It then ascended and sped off at great speed. Reports of huge yellow-white light emitting long rays to the ground. It then faded to a pinpoint and disappeared. Several copies of witness statements and a report were sent to the Joint Intelligence Organisation in Melbourne, just about this one incident. Also in this group of files from Milne Bay was a reference to a summary of the efforts made to rediscover the whereabouts of the excised frames from the famous 1953 jury film of a UFO over Port Moresby. Why was this in there? Because naive Australia sent this film to the United States for analysis, and when it was returned to us, it was minus 20 feet, or several, let's say, pertinent frames. There were reports on UFOs from individuals about an explosion while out to sea causing a bright orange flash. The explosion lit up the indoors during daylight. That could have been a meteor. And finally, a telegram from Military Command to Port Moresby to the Department of Defence regarding the very first point on screen, which was the vertical light. And as a matter of interest, if you recall the Father Gill sightings in this area in 1959, a shaft of blue light shone upwards into the sky from one of these craft. These all happened to be in the same area and cover only some of the reports, and there were hundreds of them logged in 1 year. Over the years, there have been a number of occasions where UFO researchers have run into UFO sightings generated by observations of secret aircraft. Triangles being a perfect example. Are they? Or are they ours or aren't they? To the best of our knowledge, no Australian researcher or group has suggested that secret aircraft may have been the cause of Australian UFO reports, although I'm sure they must account for some. It was therefore with surprise that we came across the following report when reviewing our RAAF UFO files. A Department of Agriculture inspector reported a UFO sighting to the RAAF in May of 1961 based on the information located in a digital copy of file series A703. A reconstruction of the incident is given below. At 8:30 in the morning, on the 25th of May 1961, children were playing in the backyard of a house in Devonport, Tasmania. The children saw something in the sky which caused them to go and get a Mr. Y out of the house. This male witness reported seeing one definite object in the sky. In colour, it was a silvery but not reflective, and in shape, shaped like a thermometer or pencil without a point. No detailed structure was noted, and there was no sound associated with the sighting. The object's speed was stated as slow. It was seen to the north-northwest over Devonport, Tasmania, travelling in a straight line. Question 26 on the RAAF official report form, which was filled in by the RAF interviewer, asks for the location of any air traffic in the vicinity at the time to discount a UFO. Typed here are the words, U2 aircraft over Great Lake at approximately 8:15 that morning, travelling in a northerly direction. So what was Tasmania doing with a U2 spy plane flying over it in 1961? The RAAF actually put together very detailed official report forms and added a page for the interrogator's comments. There are approximately 27 questions on every report form. This one on screen was taken from an air traffic controller at Tullamarine Airport, and the radar plot of this object was also mapped, as you'll see from the next slide. During the course of our research, Aura has looked at hundreds of report forms, sketches, photographs and records on so many different types of UFOs it's staggering, and we haven't even finished 10% of what could be released. I've only recounted a few sightings from the hundreds, if not thousands, of sightings on record. It would be almost impossible to present them to you. So that's why we're putting all this information on CD. Under Crown copyright, I can only show you 10% of any given file with names and details on them for research purposes. So that's why we want anyone with an interest at all to obtain a copy of the CD to see for themselves what a goldmine of information is now on record. Some of the most interesting reports are from air bases in all states, particularly Pearce in Western Australia, Woomera, Williams and Laverton. There were reports of craft described as burning tree type craft on the ground near Kalgoorlie. There are numerous reports from TAA and Qantas pilots, hundreds of individual sightings reports fully documented from every part of Australia, including oil platforms, cargo ships, naval vessels, police officers and the general public. The list is just huge. There are files covering the Nowra incident, where a pilot was paced by two objects, and that became rather a very large incident. There are files on the Nebo case in Queensland, where a tract of ground was so severely scorched, a sample of this scorched foliage was sent to the RAAF base at Garbet for chemical analysis. A witness described the affected area as 600 yards wide and 4.5 miles long. So you can imagine the size of something big enough to do that and not leave anything behind. There was no meteor there. On the 5th of December 1964, pieces of the burnt foliage from this site were packaged and sent to the CSIRO for further analysis. All these reports have been opened and are available on the net. I'm just sorry I couldn't present more to you. What did I get out of this personally? I got a lot of information and the overwhelming sense of a government who treats the UFO phenomenon with a serious and organised dedication to documenting as much as they can, in as much detail as they can, on as wide a variety of cases as possible, contrary, I think, to how they sometimes portray themselves in the media. Special thanks and gratitude must go to Dominic McNamara, our computer whiz, archive and slide director, for his help today with the presentation. And if any of you later on have any technical questions about anything on the Disclosure Project, please ask Dominic, because his eyes have looked through far more than mine have. I would also like to thank Keith Basterfield for being brave enough to take up this project on Aura's behalf and for giving me untold headaches, late nights and eye strain, but especially for all the time and effort he's put into disclosure from as early as 1989 when he first requested files under the Freedom of Information Act. I'd also like to acknowledge Bill Chalker's contribution in having files released for scrutiny back in 1982 to 84, and we were very happy to add some previously unknown files to Bill's area of interest, and that's now progressing along nicely. Also Dyson Devine and Vivian Legg for their efforts in bringing the US Disclosure Project to our Parliament back in 2002, which was just swept under the carpet. To Di Harrison and Robert Froller for publishing our findings in their Revelations column in the Australasian Ufologist, to members of Aura, there are only 8 of us, and our liaison officers interstate for taking the time, spending the money and summarising thousands of pages of government UFO files, typing them up, documenting them and publishing these summaries for all researchers, a mighty effort. So with this in mind, I have a suggestion to put to UFO groups and independent researchers in Australia. I would very much like to see these thousands of file summaries on the Disclosure website as a national database and repository for all sightings that you care to share with the public, both past, present and future, so we have one very detailed site where all sightings records are kept, so they are accessible to anyone. Anyone who cares to log on can read them. This way, rather than everyone keeping parts of the jigsaw puzzle in separate boxes all over the place, all pieces will be in one box, making it easier to put the final picture together. That way everyone could contribute and be part of the effort, but this is only a suggestion. And last but certainly not least, a word on the committee. In all the files I received, there are only 2 references that I came across to the committee. Both were from very high-ranking military personnel. I believe the committee was attached originally to the Joint Intelligence Organisation and had ties to the Chiefs of Naval and Air Force Intelligence. They were set up to review certain interesting cases that were found to be either inconclusive or inexplicable in terms of, and I quote, earthly origin. I've reproduced the letter from the Director of Naval Intelligence on the screen for you. Pay particular attention to point number 2. It is advised that the reports have been passed to the committee, which has been set up to consider such reports. The committee desires to express its thanks for such a well-authenticated sighting. We haven't been able to find out who the committee is. This committee actually seemed rather pleased to get such a well-documented and authenticated sighting. The report in question here refers to the Nara case. So where to next with this project? I guess we'll spend time plodding through the enormous amount of information at the National Archives. We have a master list of around 110 possibly relevant files, and the RAAF has files on UFOs from 1984 to 1994, so we need to take a look at those. Then it would make sense to collate and examine files for analysis and follow the US lead by trying to obtain video and audio corroborative evidence, which we've started on as I speak. We do have names now, so we can approach people. And if the representatives from those agencies sitting in the back row would like to talk to me later, I'll make myself very available. In 2 or 3 years, we aim to become politically active and seek information from the Australian government on other files, and then to lobby them to openly declare what they have. So what does the government know about UFOs? Not as much as they could, because they seem to do very little analysis on the reports they gather, but I'm only surmising this. I'm quite sure if they had a piece of the alien bumper bar, it wouldn't be documented in the archives for us to look at. I think they know everything they need to know for now, and you can bet they have files that will never see the light of day. But one thing's for sure, they would have someone, somewhere, who knows a damn sight more than we do. Postscript, I'm only going to be 2 more minutes. Last night, Keith Basterfield rang me at 10 o'clock at night. He had received those 38 files that we requested and was starting to go through them. He spent most of the day at the DSTO Edinburgh Air Force Base looking at those 38 files. They contained some wonderful information, and he was very excited about an entire file dedicated to, and keeping in mind that a file can contain 500 pages, Operation Close Encounters. So 2 points from this file very quickly are, the RAAF had a standby team to scramble in case of an ET close encounter, and he also got the distinct impression that they weren't referring to enemy aircraft. There is also a fully documented case of 2 SAS officers reporting a close encounter. When more information comes to hand, it will be posted on our website and in the Australasian Ufologist. Thank you for listening.
Now we have question time. Anybody with questions?
No?
No.
I just wondered, have any UFO investigators been mentioned by name?
They're in the ASIO files, and we can't get our hands on those. There is one particular person we are trying to get, but they won't give him to us yet. So we're still. But again, if you go through certain channels, you can get further. But yes, there were several references to Paul Norman. There were several references to Colin Norris. Yes, there were several references to, I'm trying to scan sort of 12,000 pages here. Yes, there were a lot of references to UFO guys, but in the ASIO files. And of course, Mr. Chalker, who we won't mention that. No. ASIO doesn't have a file on Bill.
Anybody else with questions? Yes, at the back.
Colin!
Which is the site that you're suggesting all the UFO reports be centralised on?
On the Australian Disclosure webpage that Dominic's put together. Yeah, look, see Dominic later, because we've got 2 websites. We've got an Aura website, we've got the Disclosure website, and now we've got so much information we can't put it on the website, so we're making it into CDs. So that's where it is. Or go to the National Australian Archives and read everything.
Anybody else? Yes.
Yes, but I'm old and deaf.
Have you had any contact with Len Beadle?
No. That's very difficult. That's a difficult question to answer, because the people that I've had contact with at Woomera, one in particular, I, for obvious reasons, can't give his name because he's still employed there. And the other one that Helen's talking to at the moment, I don't know his name. All I know is his first name is Ron. And there is another one, but I'm not prepared to mention that at the moment.
Okay, any more questions?
But you can be rest assured that when we do have all of this videotaped and all of this documented, it will be made public. Everything that Aura has done with the AUFAWN Aura Disclosure Project has been released on the web. We wanted to be transparent. We wanted everyone to see what we'd seen. None of this, it's mine, I'm keeping it, you can't have a look at it. We've done the work, and by hell have we done the work, and we've made it public, and that's what we intended to do. Martin.
Oh, yes.
Thanks, David. I found some of your closing comments very interesting. My question is, where do you think the information you have been looking at is pointing as regards information that we can't expect to get? What is it telling you about the stuff that will probably never see the light of day?
ET encounters is it's a thorn in my side. I'm absolutely sure that there have been retrievals here with ETs. I'm absolutely sure we've had retrievals of ET crash craft, but for obvious reasons they're not going to. Look, the National Australian Archives we were stunned. When we went to them, they were more than willing to give us what we wanted. But what you have to understand is you have to know what you're looking for first. They won't just give you anything. You have to find a file number, go and request it. They examine it. If they think it's okay, they'll give it to us. Then they make a digital copy and make it available on the net. We look at every page and then we summarise every page. So there's been no blackouts like the Stanton Friedman text where you only read every second word and everything else is blacked out. They give us everything that they want to give us, and we have had complete files, and we've had dozens, hundreds. So you have to know the number of the file. And the beauty of that is, in some of these reports that you've seen up on the slide, you'll notice there's a lot of handwritten notes. That's where we got a lot of information, because the Director of Naval Intelligence would write ridiculous comments on some of them, like, oh, you know, this guy's a nutcase, don't follow it any further, or, oh, this is really interesting, we should send this to the committee. And so Dom and I are absolutely paranoid on who the committee is. So, and that's one of our tasks in the future, is to find out who the committee is. So I think ETs, I think trace cases, I think analysis of samples of trace cases, I think pictures and photographs. I mean, we've got a box of 4,600 photos, and I showed you one or two of the retrieval team. And if you notice on that retrieval team, if you see the guy's case, upside down it reads AWA Retrieval Team. But they never had one, officially.
My reading of all this is that the mere fact that you can get your hands on boxes and boxes of file material, and yet we know that the subject goes a lot deeper than the material that is emerging.
It does.
It does mean that there exist all other levels of secrecy.
As I said, yeah, we've got secret, top secret, and confidential. And we haven't had anything higher than that, although I know that there's a lot more. But you have to understand that there's only 10% that's ever been documented. The rest of it is sitting there waiting to be documented. So we've got 10%, and we've looked at a fraction of 10%. So you can imagine what's in that 90%. I mean, we weren't supposed to get that tracking log. That wasn't released. It wasn't unclassified. It was still secret. They gave it to us. So, and we have a very, very good relationship with the DSTO at Woomera, which Dominic has been up there a couple of times to see the Wing Commander, Jan, who's just retired. We have a very good relationship with Graham at the Australian Archives in Adelaide, who said once when we walked in, oh, I've just found another box of stuff from Woomera, do you want it? We went, oh, okay. So when you get that kind of relationship with an archivist, it's a good idea to buy him chocolate frogs every time you go in there.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie.
That's
all. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. So what I can suggest is after the break, or during the break, if you can ask Debbie, then we are running out of time. I'm sorry.
Eric von Däniken's hypothesis will have an increasing effect on society, science, literature, and art. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is a concern that affects all of humanity.
For me, it's like souvenirs of the past. Some of our human forefathers had contact with extraterrestrials. They were here, they visited us, they were in contact. Something happened in the deep past, and it will happen again in the future.
The author of the sensational international bestseller and the most compelling non-fiction publication of all time is back in London for the first time in 25 years to celebrate Chariots of the Gods' 50th anniversary. Eric von Däniken Legacy Night. In this 2-hour special, you are invited to share with Eric his most influential discoveries and revelations. Learn about his incredible life journey as an author and researcher. Meet the team behind the highly anticipated Chariots of the Gods 360-degree entertainment franchise. Eric von Däniken Legacy Night, live streamed from the Princess Anne Theatre, BAFTA 195, Piccadilly, London, October 15th, 2016. For more information and to purchase tickets, please visit zoharstargate.com.
Keeping in mind, of course, that the National Australian Archives were obtained under the 30-year rule. That's why they've been so nice to us. Which makes 1973, at the moment, the most current record we're able to access. But I will tell you that when January the 1st clicked over this year, instead of 20 files coming up under the search term, 34 files came up, so they released another 14. However, files released under the Freedom of Information Act can be a lot more recent, so don't think we're only limited to files prior to 1974, we're not. We've also conducted register searches at our local National Archives office in Adelaide, something we will endeavour to carry out at various other archive offices around the country, which we're actually doing right now as I speak. So all the files you see as digital copies online can be viewed on your personal computers in the luxury of your own home. These records are currently held at the head office of the National Archives in Canberra. And contrary to conjecture from some who are very quick to imply that we won't find anything new in our recent government file search, we have uncovered hundreds of pages of documents that have never seen the light of day. So statements of this nature are completely without substance. So what do we know that we didn't know a year ago? We know plenty. We know that Australia, especially the RAAF and the Long Range Weapons Research Establishment at Woomera, were deeply involved with other governments and various intelligence organisations, including NASA, in joint space programs and the sharing of information relating to anything space-based. So my first file will have something to do with the international cooperation and interest in this subject. What was Project Moondust? In 1953, the USAF 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron was created. Its purpose at that time was to recover downed enemy aircraft during the Korean War. In 1957, it was expanded to recover objects and debris from space vehicles, because we had satellites in orbit then. And in 1961, according to a United States Air Force memo, which I read, in 1984. So Moondust was very much a global project. But a singular statement recounted by the American delegate to the United Nations, made by the Prime Minister of Grenada, leaps out at you on page 9 of this 42-page document and reads as follows. The recent report of the abduction of a Cessna aircraft in Australia seemed to him to be a compelling reason for the United States to come alive to its responsibilities and take a serious look at the UFO phenomenon, to which planet Earth has been conspicuously exposed since 1947. There's that date again. Two words immediately caught my attention in this phrase. The word abduction, which was used to describe the disappearance of Freddie Valentich. Not crashed or lost or missing at sea, but abducted. And of course a reference to 1947, which we all come across during the course of our research. It seems to be a defining timeline in ufology. We have pre-1947 and post-1947 as a way to categorise the modern era. It included UFOs. While researching the topic of Project Moondust on the internet, I came across a 42-page file released under the USA Freedom of Information Act, which clearly demonstrates a link between UFOs, the United Nations and Project Moondust. I should mention here that copyright for these documents on this site, and the ones I have up on screen, belong to Dr. Bob Wood and Ryan S. Wood of the United States. On the first page of these documents, the subject header simply reads Project Moondust and dates from November 73. It concerns the recovery of what may have been Soviet satellite debris. However, also included in this 42-page package are documents on a 1978 discussion concerning the potential of having the United Nations, which is a very large international body, undertake UFO investigations, report on UFO sightings, and retrieve crashed objects from several different countries. It also mentions the recovery of a spherical object said to have landed smoothly in Buenos Aires. You'll notice that I've included some extra files intermingled with my subject slides, just as examples. Some may not relate to this lecture, but I find them interesting all the same, and these are all from the Australian National Archives UFO records. The image you see up on screen at the moment is only part of one page that I typed up of hundreds of file summaries we've done. So every file and every page we've looked at, that's what we did with it, and we put it on our webpage on the net. So everything that we've looked at, you can go and look at. You can see by that what page number it was on, page 17. You can go and look at page 17 on file 58011 part 4 and look at all the documents yourself. Why do we do it this way? Rather than have other researchers laboriously go through every one of the thousands of pages at the archives looking for something in particular, we wrote brief notes on the content of every page in every file. Anyone can go to these file summaries and scan them to find what they're looking for. It's like an index.